Okay, this is the one only band of union between God and creature. All besides this or that is not this. Call it but what name you will. Is only so much error, fiction, impurity, and corruption wrought into the creature's you, and must of all necessity be entirely separated from it. Before you have to be separated from what? Corruption, impurity, error, fiction, lies, to come close to God. So before it can have the purity and holiness which alone can see God or find the divine life. For as God is an immutable will to all goodness, so the divine will can unite or work with no creaturely will, but that which wills with him only that which is good. Here the necessity is absolute. Nothing will do instead of this will. All controversies of holiness contrivances of holiness, all forms of religious piety signify nothing. So what? Being religious signifies nothing without this will to all goodness. All right? So you have to have God to have holiness. You have to have God to have true religion. For as the will to all goodness is the whole nature of God, so it must be the whole nature of every service or religion. Do you hear that? God has to be the source. You have to go to God, all right? That can be acceptable to him. For nothing serves God or worships and adores him, but that which wills and works with him. For God can delight in nothing but his own will and his own spirit, because all goodness is included in it and can be nowhere else. And therefore, everything that follows an own will, so if your self will and you follow your own will instead of the will of God, or your own spirit forsakes the one will to all goodness, and whilst it does so, has no capacity for the light and spirit of God. So if you're self-willed, if you're selfish, you don't have the light and you don't have the spirit of God. The necessity, therefore, of the spirit of love is what God himself cannot dispense with the creature, no more than he can deny himself or act contrary to his only holy being, but as it was his will to all goodness that brought forth angels and the spirits of men, so he can will nothing in their existence, but that they should live and work and manifest the same spirit of love and goodness. So goodness which brought them into being, everything therefore, but the will and life of goodness is an impotency in the creature, and is rebellion against the whole nature of God. So rebellion, you see, as in the Bible, it tells you rebellion is as a sin of witchcraft. So what's the spirit of love telling you right now? Rebellion is the whole nature that turns against God. There is no peace, nor ever can be, for the soul of man, but in the purity and perfection of its first created nature, nor can it have its purity and perfection in any other way than by the spirit of love. For as love is the God that created all things, so love is the purity, the perfection, the blessing of all created things. And nothing can live in God but as it lives in love. Look at every vice, pain, disorder in human nature. It is in itself nothing else but the spirit of the creature, turning from the universality of love, turning away from God, to some self-seeking, our own will in created things, so that love alone is and only can be the cure of every evil. And he that lives in the purity of love is risen out of the power of evil into the freedom of the one Spirit of heaven. The schools have given us very accurate definitions of every vice, whether it be covetousness, pride, wrath, envy, etc., and shown us how to conceive them as notionality, distinguished from one another. But the Christian has a much shorter way of knowing their nature and power, and what they all are and do in and to himself. For call them by what name you will, or distinguish them with ever so much exactness, they are all separately and jointly just that same one thing, and do all the same one work, as the scribes and the Pharisees, the hypocrites and the rabble of the Jews who crucified Christ, were all but one and the same thing, and did all and all did one and the same work. However, different they were in outward names. What? They were just different in names. If you would therefore have a true sense of the nature and power of pride, wrath, covetousness, envy, they are in their whole nature nothing else but the murderers and crucifiers of the true Christ of God. So those people, I told you about them. Those were the ones who crucified Christ. Not as the high priest did any 100 years ago, nailing his outward humanity to an outward cross, but crucifying afresh the Son of God, the Holy Immanuel, who is the Christ that every man crucifies as often as he gives way to wrath, pride, envy, or covetousness. For every temper or passion that is contrary to the new birth of Christ and keeps the Holy Immanuel from coming to life in the soul is in the strictest truth of the words a murderer and a killer of the Lord of life. And where pride and envy and hatred are suffered to live, there the same thing is done as when Christ was killed and Barabbas was saved. The thief beside him saved alive. The Christ of God was not then first crucified when the Jews brought him to the cross, but Adam and Eve were the first real murderers for the death which happened to them in the day, and they did eat of the earthly tree, was the death of the Christ of God, or the divine life in their souls. For Christ had never come into the world as a second Adam to redeem it, had he not been originally the life and perfection and glory of the first Adam. And he is our atonement and reconciliation with God, because by and through him brought to life in us, and are set again in the first state of holiness, and have Christ again in us, as our first father had at his creation. For had not Christ been in our first father as a birth of life in them, Adam had been created a mere child of wrath, in the same impurity of nature, in the same enmity with God, and in the same want of an atoning Savior, as we are unto this day. For God can have no delight or union with any creature, but because his well-beloved Son, the express image of his person, is found in it. This is a true of all unfallen, as of all fallen creatures. The one are redeemed, and the other want no redemption. They don't want no healing. They don't know Christ's name, and they don't want no healing. Only through the life of Christ dwelling in them. For as the Word, the Spirit of love, is telling you this, Word, or Son of God, is the creator of all things, and by him everything is made that was made. So everything that is good and holy is unfallen angels, is as much through this living and dwelling in them, as everything that is good and holy in the redeemed man is through him. And he is just as much the preserver, the strength and the glory and the life of all the thrones and principalities of heaven, and he is the righteous, the peace, and the redemption of the fallen man. This Christ of God has many names in scriptures, but they all mean only this, that he is and alone can be the light and life and holiness of every creature that is holy, whether in heaven or on earth. Wherever Christ is not, there is the wrath of nature, our nature left to itself and its own tormenting strength of life, to feel nothing in itself but that vain restlessness contrary of its own working properties. So, alright, this is the only origin of hell and every kind of curse and misery in the creature. It is nature without the Christ of God, or the Spirit of love ruling over it. And here you may observe that wrath has in itself the nature of hell, and that it can have no beginning or power in any creature, but so far as it has lost the Christ of God. And when Christ is everywhere, wrath and hatred will be nowhere. Whenever therefore you will willingly indulge wrath or let your mind work in hatred, you not only work without Christ, but you resist him and withstand him redeeming power over you. You do in reality what those Jews did when they said, "We will not have this man to reign over us." For Christ never was, nor can be in any creature, but purely as a spirit of love, In all the universe of nature, nothing but heaven and heavenly creatures ever had or could have been known